Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everything You Want to Know About Non-Monogamy. My name's Leanne Yau. I'm a polyamory educator and I run a page called Polyphilia. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, all the socials at Polyphilia blog. And yeah, I'm here today to answer your questions about non-monogamy. Yeah, if you're already here, then please say hello in the chat and say where you're calling from. I'm in the UK at the moment. And tell me how your Pride Month has been. Maybe a comment and say what Pride means to you. To me, it means community. And finding people who understand and accept you for who you are. So acceptance is another one. I've had a really good Pride Month. It's also my birthday month, I've been having a good time with my partners and friends. I celebrated my birthday, had a great birthday party. In fact, it was a birthday orgy. So it was me and my closest friends and partners. And we all just had a good old gay time. What else? Yeah, I went to Glastonbury Festival. It's festival season. Don't know how many of you have been to some festivals lately. But anyway, yeah, so I'm here to answer questions about non-monogamy. So non-monogamy is a very broad umbrella term that basically encompasses, well, anything that isn't monogamy. That's kind of in the name, right? And so that includes anything about open relationships, swinging, polyamory, kind of any kind of monogamish whole pass type relationships, like anything that isn't like an exclusive romantic and sexual connection. I'm happy to talk about that. I myself, I'm in a polyamorous relationship. Yeah, and I have a number of partners and lovers of kind of varying degrees. And I've been polyamorous and actively polyamorous for a long time now. I started identifying as non-monogamous and being in non-monogamous relationships when I was 17. So it's been a while, and I'm happy to share kind of any insights and advice and anecdotes and things like that with you. So if you have any questions about non-monogamy, whether it's things like what is non-monogamy, or kind of how do you start a non-monogamous relationship, or how do you deal with jealousy? These are the kind of very common questions I get, like, oh, what do you do if you want to meet your partner's other partner? That's another one. But yeah, like ask your questions and I'll be picking them and they'll be showing up on the screen and I'll be kind of going into detail and answering them. So yeah, let me know how your Pride Month has been going, and let me know kind of what questions you've got for me. While I'm waiting, figure I may as well just expand on the different types of non-monogamy. So I've already kind of mentioned them, but I haven't gone into detail about what they are. So non-monogamy, I kind of see it as a spectrum where you go from kind of like strict monogamy, which is like total romantic and sexual exclusivity, to polyamory, which is on the other end, which is kind of total non-exclusivity romantically or sexually. And obviously within that, there are like different types of polyamory as well, but that's not going to be what I'm covering today. Today, we're just talking about non-monogamy more generally, although I'm happy to answer questions about polyamory as well. But yeah, so we've got kind of like open relationships and swinging. So open relationships are just basically any kind of relationship that like where you can be with other people. And I think these days it's more commonly referred to when kind of people are sexually open but not romantically open. And then but yeah, like it's kind of also like an umbrella term, but I think these days it's kind of more specific to that. And then we've got swinging, which is where couples engage in kind of group sex recreationally with other people, either with singles or couples. So this might look like having threesomes regularly, or foursomes, or going to sex parties and orgies together and that kind of thing. And then we've got polyamory, which is basically where you have multiple romantic connections, not just multiple sexual connections, but you can, be in love with multiple people and form relationships with multiple people. So yeah, hope that kind of covers some of the basics, some of the 101 as a starter. And I see we've got some questions in already. So Jed Wilson asks, what's the difference between ENM and NM? Great question, Jed. So, for a long time, when people referred to non-monogamy, they said ethical non-monogamy, or in academic research, they referred to it as consensual non-monogamy. And that was mainly to distinguish between, you know, kind of these like open, honest, communicative relationships that we're having with multiple people and cheating, or just yeah, like, well, cheating I think kind of being the main thing, because when you say that you're non-monogamous, a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about, you know, whether your partner knows or not, or like whether they consent to it or anything like that. And so it became very popular for people to refer to themselves as ENM or CNM, to distinguish that like they were in a relationship style where everyone knew what was going on, everyone enthusiastically consented, and you know, it was like an arrangement that was like, you know, agreed upon. But I think these days, people just say non-monogamy a lot more. Obviously, there's still a lot of stigma against non-monogamous people, and obviously there's still misconceptions out there that I do my best every day on my platform to combat. But we're trying to move away from saying ethical, consensual non-monogamy, or at least I am. Some people still want to stick to it, and that's fine. But we're trying to move away from that because we don't say ethical monogamy. We don't say consensual monogamy. It's kind of just assumed that if you say you're monogamous, that everyone agrees, and you know that it's like an ethical arrangement. And so I personally find it somewhat defensive when people say that they are ethically non-monogamous, consensually non-monogamous, and I don't really want to kind of define myself by some people's bad behavior. You know, I just want to say that I'm non-monogamous, and if people want to project their things onto that, that's their business, and that's not my problem. So, you know, some people still say ENM or CNM, and it functionally means the same thing as NM, non-monogamous. But just because we're trying to kind of portray like non-monogamy as an equally valid relationship style to monogamy, rather than kind of some thing that you need to qualify as like ethical and consensual specifically. You know, that's why people are saying non-monogamy much more now, and that's why that's the title of this live stream. So I hope that helps clarify things. Basically, the short answer is they mean the same thing, but you know, like the older terms kind of were born out of like stigma and a kind of defensiveness, and I'm hoping that we can move into a world where people don't assume that we're cheaters, or assume that like we're forcing people into it, or anything like that. So saying non-monogamy is a part of that movement. So all right, let's see some more questions. Okay, Giacomo from Berlin, I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, asks, how do you manage jealousy? So I think that's what you mean anyway. Yeah, how do you manage jealousy? So I think that's a very common question, like I said, you know, in non-monogamous relationships. Everyone's a bit different, because jealousy can come from a variety of sources. So, you know, maybe you have some trauma or attachment wounds. Maybe you are worried that your partner will leave you. Maybe you are insecure and make comparisons with yourself and your partner's other partners, and that's really affecting you. Or maybe, you know, it could be a whole host of reasons. And so, kind of, I think managing jealousy is about like identifying what that jealousy is and where it comes from specifically for you, and then going from there, figuring out whether it's something that you need to work on yourself, or whether it's something that you need to communicate with your partner about, so you can figure out some solutions on kind of like maybe it's coming up with new agreements to manage it or process it together, or just to talk about it so they know, and they know how best to look after you. So it's a very broad question, but broadly, you know, I think that yeah, jealousy is just made up of like a bunch of different discrete emotions, and you need to kind of unpack that a little. So a lot of managing jealousy is just unpacking your emotions, being self-aware of like how you're feeling and where that feeling is coming from, whether those feelings come from core beliefs that are no longer serving you, and processing them to let them go. And you know, sometimes jealousy is helpful. Sometimes if you're in a situation, if your partner is just genuinely being quite neglectful or like not meeting your needs, then jealousy is a helpful emotion to help you identify that, right? Because it's not, the goal is not to just stop feeling jealousy, because I think sometimes it can be a useful tool in identifying anything that's wrong, that feels wrong, you know, in the relationship, and not just like, you know, with you specifically. Because sometimes it's not you, sometimes it's your partner, sometimes it's just that the connection you're in isn't right for you. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question about jealousy. Okay, let's see. Stephen Mallet asks, one thing we have to navigate in poly is the capacity of attention and how much energy we can invest in relationships. Any suggestions around the ways we can make time in poly and manage expectations? So yeah, like I think that time management is certainly like a big uh, factor, you know, in kind of navigating non-monogamous relationships and poly relationships. Um, you know, like I think that obviously, like, while polyamorous people, like, typically in romantic relationships, you'd invest a lot more time and energy than you would with a casual connection who you might see less frequently, right? Or you might be less enmeshed. But time management is still a thing that is, you know, important across these. And I would argue as well, like, even if you're in a monogamous relationship and you have a lot of close friendships, if you've got like a very demanding job, or you've got like lots of hobbies or various things like that, time management is still an issue there. So it's just a general skill that I think is useful for just daily life, no matter what kind of relationship that you're in. But it is especially pertinent, you know, in these situations when you're dealing with multiple intimate connections, for sure. So I think like the your capacity highly kind of depends on the individual again. But you know, I would start like with like assessing, you know, how much time you have to invest in connections in the first place, right? Like, so like I said, you know, you might have other things taking up your time, like your job or your hobbies or family or whatever other kind of commitments that you have. And then from there, you know, how much time do you have left over, and what are you going to use that time for? Are you going to be investing in multiple kind of romantic connections, like serious connections that you'd probably have to invest a lot more like time and energy into to maintain? Or would you want like one partner that you spend a lot of time with, and then kind of the occasional hookup here and there, the occasional sex party here and there? Or would you want to have like multiple casual connections where, you know, you can kind of be a bit more like flexible, I suppose, with like how frequently you want to see people and that kind of thing? I'm making kind of big generalizations here, but that's the general idea. So, you know, how like just figuring out how much time you have, and then also just what you want to do with that time. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of one tip that I would have. And I think another thing is in terms of like setting expectations with your partners, like talking to them about like, well, you know, how much time would you like to spend together? Because some people are, I guess the term is like more high maintenance than others. I don't like, I can't think of a better word to describe it at the moment, but I think you know what I mean. You know, like some people, they're okay with like seeing each other relatively infrequently and still being able to maintain a connection. And other people, they need like a certain amount of kind of frequency or regularity in order to kind of, you know, feel like still connected to you. And everyone's different. And also, you know, some people are extroverts, some people are introverts. So, for example, like if I had two partners and one was extroverted and the other one was introverted, I would probably spend different amounts of time with them, because maybe the introverted person would be more like, easily kind of like tired out by my boundless energy, and they would need more time to recharge, right? So then, you know, you have to kind of be very intentional about customizing your connections with different people. And you know, and that's the freedom and also the terror of it, right? Because I think in non-monogamy, you're like, the amazing thing is that you can do whatever you want, but also the terrifying thing is that you can do whatever you want. And not having a blueprint or like you know, a roadmap on like what you feel you should do is liberating, but also simultaneously you can feel overwhelmed by choice. But I think as long as you're communicating with the people that you're engaging with about like your capacity, you know, and kind of what you want, and see if that overlaps with what they want, then you can probably kind of figure out something in the middle. Or, you know, if not, then you're not compatible, and it is what it is, you know. So yeah, I think that answers the question, and I hope that helps, Stephen. So let's see. Okay, Giacomo has another quite a good question. They say, I just started experimenting with ENM with my girlfriend, and I still don't know whether I want to be informed or not. How do you manage the communication with your partner when dating solo? So I assume by this question, what you're talking about is like how much you want to know about kind of your girlfriend's adventures in dating, and how much you want to tell each other about it, and kind of in what detail. So I think, like, you know, there's like three different tiers to this. Like, this is kind of how I like to separate it in my mind. You know, there's a tier that's like need to know basis. So you know, things like around like sexual health, for instance, I think would be things that you would want to like talk about. Like, for example, if you've kind of had sex with someone else, and that would like affect you know, you and your partner's kind of risk profile with like testing and protection and things like that. And these are things that you would need to talk about, right? Because that affects your sexual safety and sexual health. So that's one example of a thing that is like a need to know. And then there are things that you want to know. And that could be different for everyone, right? Like, some people, they want to know lots of detail about their partners. Like, you know, they like, the more that their partners tell them about the date that they went on, the more excited they get, and the more kind of happy they feel, you know, sharing this joy and this experience and this moment with their partner, and being happy because they're happy. And other people, they just don't really care that much. They're just like, I'm glad you're having a good time. I don't need to know the details, not because I'm afraid to hear them or too insecure to hear them. I just don't care. And just give me the highlights reel, and we're good to go, right? And then there are some people who, you know, they have some more stuff to work through, and they don't want to hear it, or want to hear kind of bits, right? As they kind of like work through their feelings on the matter. And yeah, so like, I think it's different for everyone. So if you're not sure where your boundaries lie in terms of like how much detail you want to hear with your girlfriend's exploits, then I would suggest asking closed questions as opposed to open questions. So what I mean by that is, instead of like asking an open question that gives your partner a lot of freedom to answer the question however they want, such as, how did the date go? You can ask a closed question like, where did you go on your date? Or, did you have sex? Or you know, how would you rate it out of 5? I don't know. And then from there, you can kind of suss out like what makes you feel okay, what makes you feel good, what makes you feel slightly uncomfortable, but still, you know, like tolerable, and what is like an absolute no. And I think also you have to be aware of like your motivations for wanting to know something. So, for example, you know, are you asking this question because you are genuinely interested and you want to be excited for your partner, and just, you know, yeah, you want to know what's going on in their life? Or are you asking out of morbid curiosity to satisfy some insecurity and so on? So, for example, you know, there's a very big difference between asking something like, oh, you know, did you enjoy the sexy time you had with them? And, are her boobs bigger than mine, you know, or is dick bigger than mine, or something like that, right? Because a question like that, like, unless it's in a kink context, in which case, if you're into that, great. But like, I think examining the motivations behind why you're asking a question is as important as thinking of like what you want to ask. Because yeah, like, if you feel like the questions that you're asking are coming from an unhealthy place, or, you know, or maybe the questions that you're not asking are coming from a place of like not wanting to kind of deal with certain insecurities, or just pretend something isn't happening, then that would be something to, yeah, to work on within yourself, and to be aware of, and hopefully kind of process and work your way through. So yeah, like, and I think apart from that, like, Other things that you might need to know is just like, well, if you live together, for instance, oh, when you're coming home, like, would you like me to stay up? Do you want to talk after the date? What are we going to do, like, before, during, and after? Um, kind of just general date logistics. I have an article on the Field blog. If the person who's managing this call could please put the link in it. The article is called "My Partner is on a Date. Help!" It's on the Field blog, and I basically talk about just tips for like what to do before your partner goes on a date, while your partner is on a date, and after your partner is finished going on the date. And so, yeah, if I'm sure the Field person can put it in the live stream. Thank you, Steph. Put it in the chat. And hopefully you can get more information there. And of course, I always have more resources on my social media, on my website, and so on. So hopefully that helps. So let's see. Okay, so this person's kind of put their question into two comments, so I'm going to read it out. So number one, Shawal asks, I decided to try being non-monogamous, specifically solo poly, last year. Part of that is because I do believe I would like to be free to love more than one person. And then their second thing is, but part of it is also I've been through so much BS in monogamous relationships that I just don't want to anymore. Is the latter reason a bad reason to be non-monogamous? Well, I think, like, it depends on kind of what BS you're speaking about, because, I think there is definitely BS that's specific to monogamous relationships, but there's also BS specific to polyamorous or non-monogamous relationships. So it's about, like, pick your poison, right? Like, there are pros and cons to both. If you feel that you are more aligned with non-monogamy and that you feel more comfortable with it, you feel more aligned with it, you feel you're capable of loving or kind of engaging with more than one person, and you feel like, if you're looking through the pros and cons, that the pros outweigh the cons generally, and the cons are like, are cons you're able to deal with compared to the BS in monogamy, as you say, then I don't see anything wrong with that, right? I think the trouble kind of comes if you're like trying to avoid commitment, for example, by engaging in non-monogamy, because non-monogamy requires, an equal amount, if not more, commitment. You're just doing it with multiple people at once, and being with multiple people isn't an excuse to be disrespectful or avoidant, or commitment phobic. And I think that is a big misconception about non-monogamy, that like if you're seeing multiple people, then you're less invested in them, which isn't necessarily the case. So yeah, basically, at the end of the day, we're engaging in relationships with connections, whether you're dealing with one person or two or five. And a lot of those skills are transferable, and a lot of the things that you'll experience in any of those relationship styles are probably similar. You'll be taking leaps of faith. You'll be opening yourself up to people. You'll be very vulnerable. You'll be hurt. You'll experience heartbreak, sometimes multiple times over if you're dealing with multiple breakups at the same time. And relationships, they allow us to see ourselves, right? They're mirrors that kind of reflect like our deepest kind of core wounds and things like that, right? And if you're not prepared to do that with one person, you'll probably not do too well with doing that with multiple people. So yeah, I think it highly depends on like the BS you're talking about. Without more detail, I can't be sure. But generally speaking, if you feel more aligned with non-monogamy, and you did say that you want to be free to love more than one person, then good for you. That sounds great, and I hope you have a good time. Okay, so let's see. TPS Flicks asks, how do you manage the need for transparency in communication, whether for sexual health or mental well-being, with spontaneity when starting with someone new? So I guess it depends on what's more important to you. Because, I think that, yeah, like I think it can feel like you're like ruining the mood if you're kind of hooking up with someone and then in the middle of it you're like, wait, we need to talk about expectations and we need to talk about testing and these things. Um, but it's kind of like having consent talks, right? Like kind of checking in regularly and and initiating and kind of being clear about things. Like it's something that we're not taught to do, by the media and stuff like that. But I think it's good practice and it comes, practice makes perfect. So I would say like it depends on kind of what information you're looking for, when you're talking about kind of transparency and communicating with people, and then kind of deciding like at what stage you want to bring that up. There's a different person who asked kind of when is it appropriate to like bring up that you're non-monogamous with someone that you're interested in. So that kind of gets looped into like this question as well, right? Like when do you bring up certain things, when you're dealing with someone new? Let's use that as an example, right? So when do you disclose that you're non-monogamous, right? Say you meet someone at a bar, in a club, in a bookshop, I don't know. And you're feeling the vibe, you're feeling the chemistry, there's a spark. But you don't know whether they're monogamous or not, or if they're looking for something casual or not. For me, it would be like when kind of there's a flirtation going on, there's like interest to take things further. That would probably be when I would be like, oh, by the way, I'm non-monogamous, I'm looking for these things, just want to check in about whether that's like what you're looking for as well, and feel free to ask me any questions about that. I would say that like fairly early, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have a really good connection and then you disclose that and then they get mad at you for and accuse you of like omitting that to get with them and things like that. Because there's a lot of monogamous people who don't like to engage with non-monogamous people even for casual sex. Like because these days I think because of just dating apps and the way like just dating culture has evolved over time, a lot of people start with casual connections and then they escalate to a romantic connection after having slept together for a while. That's like a very normal thing that people do these days. And so someone, even if they're like sleeping with you casually, they would do so kind of with the expectation that there might be the potential for a monogamous relationship in the future, and if that's not something that you can provide, then they're not interested. Obviously, that doesn't apply to every single monogamous person, but like, it is something that you would need to consider. So, yeah. And I think kind of for sexual health, I think if it's important to you, bring it up. If you're okay with taking the risk, then, talk about using kind of protection and maybe talk about testing later. This is, everyone has different kind of risk profiles, right? Like some people want to be super upfront about it. Some people really want to see the results, on paper before they engage. And some people are happy to use protection and worry about the rest later. It really depends. And, if you're the type of person who wants to have these conversations up front and you deal with someone who gets very turned off by it, if you're like, hey, it's really important to me to see like when you last got tested and they're like, ugh, why so serious? They're probably not the person for you. And in the moment it might suck because you're like, oh well, I really liked the person and now it's ruined the mood and now I feel like I shouldn't have brought it up. The reality is like, yeah, like no one's wrong. You're just incompatible and you have different needs, and that's okay. All right. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers kind of vaguely what you're looking for there. Okay, let's see. All right. Shaq asks, how do you introduce the idea to your partner and how do you bring it up? So how do you, how do you open the conversation with your partner about opening up the relationship? So I have only ever kind of opened up from a monogamous relationship once. So that was when I was 17 in my first non-monogamous relationship. Every other relationship I've been in since has been non-monogamous from day one. Like sometimes I was already dating multiple people when we met, and so we just continued doing that. Having said that, I post a lot of content about and have personally in private sessions supported a lot of couples and singles with kind of bringing this up to their partner and talking through the transition. And I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard thing to do. Because if you're in a monogamous relationship, particularly if you've been in a monogamous relationship for a very long time, there are certain routines that you get used to, certain expectations that you have, and certain, just like habits that you form and beliefs that you base the relationship on, that you have to kind of throw out the window when you open it up. So, for example, a very common belief when it comes to love and relationships is that, you know, when you love someone, you have to forsake all others. You have to, be exclusive in order to prove that you're truly in love with and committed to someone. And that obviously doesn't work if you're in a non-monogamous relationship, because the whole point is that you're not exclusive. So you have to rethink how you show your love and commitment to your partner, right? If it's not through not fucking other people, then what is it going to be, right? You have to be a lot more intentional with the time that you spend with them. You have to be, a lot more kind of cognizant of like telling them kind of what makes them unique and special and things like that, right? And you have to make the relationship its own, separate, from kind of other connections that you might be experiencing. Okay, but having said all that, because I don't want to put you off, I'm just acknowledging that a lot of people find the transition very difficult. It's a very long and lengthy process. And also, sometimes by bringing up the idea, people break up. I think you have to be very, very certain that kind of non-monogamy is something that you would be prepared to risk your relationship for. Because there's always the possibility that even if you're compatible in a monogamous relationship, you might not be compatible in a non-monogamous relationship. And you might not be compatible in terms of just like, not just like whether you want non-monogamy in the first place, but also the types of non-monogamy that you want to engage in. And this is very natural, right? Sometimes people grow in different directions, and it is what it is. So, I would think about like why you're motivated to be non-monogamous and how you feel about monogamy in general. And then, in terms of bringing it up to your partner, rather than being like, I want to do this, let's do this. I think maybe softer ways to engage with it is if there was a show that you watched where there was some non-monogamy involved, or if there was an article that you read that you wanted to bring up, and you'd be like, what do you think about that? So not asking what do you think about us doing that, but just what do you think about the concept of an open relationship or the concept of non-monogamy in general. And I think testing the waters there and being able to talk about the concept will probably give you a good litmus test on how your partner feels about it. If your partner immediately shuts down and is like, I think it's disgusting, then you'll probably know kind of what to do next. And if they're kind of more open to it and they're like, oh yeah, I think it's cool, but I don't know if it's for me. There's kind of, there's room for discussion either way, right? Whereas I feel like if you kind of bring it up that you want to do this like now, that kind of backs your partner into a corner, makes them question a lot of things, and it might, put them in a not so great emotional position to have a productive conversation. So yeah, that's kind of how I would advise kind of people bring it up. Talk about the concept before talking about actions. And hopefully, if you and your partner are both communicative people and are good at just talking about concepts in general, you'll be able to have like a good conversation and suss out like where to go from there. So yeah, let's see what else. Can you talk about navigating relationship hierarchies when practicing solo polyamory? Thank you, Leslie. Okay, so I think that like solo polyamorous people are, just for those of you who don't know, solo polyamory is a specific polyamorous relationship style where you have multiple loving connections, multiple romantic relationships, but you don't participate in the traditional markers of, the traditional markers of commitment, such as you might live alone or with a friend instead of a partner. You don't want to get married. Maybe you don't want children. And it's very much kind of a type of polyamory where you're focused on prioritizing your independence and not kind of being part of like a couple, so to speak. Which doesn't mean that you don't have meaningful connections. You still do, but you just don't do the things that most people would do to denote like serious commitment in a relationship. Because you don't have to live with someone to prove that you love them, and you don't have to get married to someone to prove that you love them. So yeah, so there are, and then obviously there are other types of polyamory. Some people have very strict hierarchical relationships where there's a very clear primary relationship. This might be a spouse, this might be someone that you live with, and then other kind of connections who you don't do that with, or you have specific rules around. And I personally am in a non-hierarchical relationship. I live alone. My partner lives with housemates. We want to move in together at some point in the future, but like not in a way that shows that we're kind of, immediately each other's kind of first priority above everyone else automatically, right? I know we have other partners and friends as well. And so, I think hierarchy is a tricky thing as well because lots of people define it differently. There's obviously inevitable kind of hierarchies that result from if you're married, for instance. There's hierarchies just on a societal, institutional level that kind of can't be avoided. And then there's the hierarchies where people agree on things like, I get to decide if you can continue this relationship with this other person, or we're the only people who can meet the family, or you're not allowed to go on holidays with your other partners, things like that. And the second type of hierarchy is something that I don't personally gel with, but that's my personal preference. And if other people want to do that, then hopefully they make these agreements clear to the people that they're dating, and everything's laid out, so people know where they're at, and everyone kind of can practice informed consent. So I think if we're talking about the first type of hierarchy, like where like say so two people live together and you're dating one of them, or two people are married and you're dating one of them, or they have kids, right? Then I think talking about the impact, having a conversation, with them about like how this impacts you as a solo polyamorous person, whether socially or financially, right? Because at the end of the day, our society prioritizes couples. They actively, financially incentivize you to be in a couple for tax benefits and things. It's a phenomenon referred to as singleism, in the monogamous world, right? Like the bias against single people and the social and financial costs for being single and not in a relationship, right? There are very real consequences. And so, and that's something that solo polyamorous people contend with as people who are often perceived as single, even if they are not actually single. I think talking to the people that you're with about like the real emotional and social and whatever impacts that this has on you, and seeing kind of what ways you can mitigate that, would be kind of where I would start with that. And and if they're not open to that conversation, if they're not open to acknowledging that there is this impact, or they try and make you feel bad for like wanting to talk about it, then I think that will say a lot about how much they care about you and how ready they are to engage in those conversations. Because I think we have to be real about the fact that even if you are married and you say you're trying to be as non-hierarchical as possible, there are real things that happen as a result of you being married, and those things need to be upfront and discussed. And I would rather deal with someone who's very upfront about the hierarchy that's in place, so I know exactly what's going on, exactly where my place is and where I'm at, than someone who is clearly hierarchical but tries to pretend they're not, right? At the end of the day, we're prioritizing informed consent and honest communication and transparency, and having our feelings heard and validated and things like that. I'm not solo polyamorous, but I hope that helps kind of with navigating these conversations with people who are in hierarchical relationships, whether intentionally or not. All right. So let's see. So okay, Cardabon 12 asks, are there any practices or ways to navigate dating or poly that you'd recommend? for people who travel often. I've often avoided dating due to feeling like I'd need to be around all the time. So I think this is just a matter of setting expectations, right? Like I said earlier, like though I was answering a question about like time time management and setting expectations about that. If you travel a lot, then you'd have to be dating people who are okay with that, you know? Um, whether it's people who are comfortable only kind of seeing you in person like less frequently, who can deal with like a somewhat half long distance relationship where maybe you video call or something, or send postcards or whatever. um, and you'd probably not be compatible with someone who very much wanted a lot of enmeshment and a lot of kind of in-person contact, right? So I think it's about like finding the people who would gel with that, and just being honest with people about that and rejecting those who can't fit into your life in that way. If I like people do this in monogamous relationships as well. Like some people do better in long distance connections than others. And some people require a lot more contact with their partners than others, whereas some people just really enjoy being by themselves and enjoying their own space and things like that, right? Like for one person, if you're traveling a lot, they might be like, wow, for example, if you're living together, they might be like, wow, I get to have the house all to myself. That's amazing. Whereas another person might be like, now I don't know what to do with myself, because all these things I wanted to do with my partner. Or like, I feel really lonely, or I feel really isolated, here in this big flat or something. I don't know. I'm imagining scenarios. But yeah, like, I think it's about finding people who are compatible and then also communicating these expectations, right? Like, I travel often. This is what that might mean. I have the capacity to do X, Y, Z. I cannot do X, Y, Z. How do you feel about that? What do you need? And is there overlap, and can we compromise, and are we compatible in that way, or are we looking for different things? um and like there are people who are okay with you not being around all the time, and there are, yeah, like I said, some people are able to sustain long distance or infrequent connections better than others, and it's just a matter of filtering and finding them. Hope that helps. um all right. So Shaq asks, never been in a relationship, but if I wanted to give it a try, would it be okay to just jump right into poly or go into mono first? And is it disrespectful if you're just experimenting? So I'm not sure if you mean you've never been in like a polyamorous relationship or non-monogamous relationship specifically, or if you mean like you've never been in a relationship full stop. But either way, if you wanted to give polyamory specifically a try, why would you want to do monogamy first? Like there are lots of, there are some people who are capable of both monogamy and polyamory, and there are some people who just, frankly, are not very good at being monogamous. And, you know, just, yeah, like you don't have to be good at monogamy in order to be good at polyamory, is what I'm trying to say. You need to be good at relationships, but that's not the same as being good at monogamy. And so, obviously it's a steep learning curve, but still, like if monogamy doesn't feel right for you and monogamy, um, yeah, like if it's not kind of aligned with how you want to be, I personally think it's much easier to start a relationship non-monogamous from the start than to like start mono first and then move to poly, because like I said earlier, the transition is very hard, because you've already built a foundation of monogamy, you've already built these expectations, and now you have to rebuild the whole thing. And a lot of people, frankly, don't survive that transition. So if you want to be non-monogamous, I think in most scenarios, I would say just be non-monogamous. And as for the experimenting angle, I think as long as you're being clear with people that you're still, figuring out what you're looking for, I don't think it's disrespectful to say that. You know, I don't think it's disrespectful to be honest about where you're at and to be honest about where you're not sure. And if people are okay with that, they can give informed consent. And they accept the potential risks and consequences, and you communicate through it, right? Maybe you do it and you realize it's not for you, but at least if you told the person, it might still be sad and disappointing, but at least at least they accept the risks of that, and you talked about it, and you were able to be honest with each other about it. So I don't think it's disrespectful to be experimenting, but I do think it's disrespectful to not be honest about the fact that you're experimenting. All right. Hope that helps. So we have about like 15 minutes to go of this live stream, and so I just wanted to give a friendly reminder to people that after this hour ends, I will be jumping in a group chat to further discuss any kind of topics related to non-monogamy. So if you're interested in continuing the conversation after this and potentially connecting with some other cool people who have been on this live stream so far, then please join the group chat, which is available on the Field app. Thank you, Steph, for putting the link in the private chat. So yeah, please join that link. I will be there, and I'll be interacting with you for another hour after this live stream. So yeah, once again, it's on the Field app. The link is in the comments. And yeah, we'll be continuing the conversation. You can ask me more questions there if I didn't get to your question here. So, okay, let's see. I have time for a couple more questions, so feel free to send them in. Leslie Z comes in with another question of, do you have any advice for sharing your non-monogamous relationship style to your family? So, okay, I think like with coming out to people, whether it's as gay or trans or non-monogamous or like whatever else, just having these difficult conversations and revealing a part of yourself to your loved ones. I would prepare in advance by thinking about like what they might ask you and what might come up. So for instance, if you have a very conservative family who are very monogamous and straight, for instance, and you tell them that you're non-monogamous, they might say ignorant, misinformed things. For example, that like, maybe you just have commitment issues, or you're gonna get lots of STIs, or isn't that like you're dragging your partner into this, you were just cheating, or like there's so many misconceptions out there that I can't even possibly list them all, but these are the ones that just pop in my mind. But yeah, if you have like, I think if you can anticipate like what your family might how they might respond, then you can prepare answers in advance, so you're not put on the spot in the moment and you have things to say like if they come at you about stuff. I think as well, thinking about like why you want to share this with your family. If it's important to you to be open and honest with the people in your life, regardless of how they might react to that information, then go ahead, great. But if you're looking for a certain type of response from your family and you're not 100% sure you'll get it, then, that's a risk that you have to take, right? And it's also perfectly valid if you don't want to have that conversation with your family. There are plenty of people who are out with friends or at work, but they're not out to family. And that's okay. Not being out to your family doesn't make you less valid. Obviously, it makes certain things more complicated. But it doesn't make you a bad person, and you're not obligated to share that kind of information with your family. So I would think about the motivations about that as well. And also kind of not putting too much on like getting a certain outcome, right? Like if your family doesn't react in the way that you would like, because sometimes some people are just stubborn and ignorant and they stay that way and there's nothing that you can do about it. And for me, my family took a long time to come around. They took about 7 years to come around. I think it's really only now, like running this platform where I educate other people about polyamory and open relationships, that my family have actually started finally taking me seriously. And not everyone does what I do. So, it's been a long and hard journey with a lot of patience and a lot of frustration. And I think that there are some people who wouldn't have made the choices that I made in terms of the stuff that I tolerated and the stuff that I had to educate them on. Not everyone has the time and energy for that, and that's also fine. I think it's a personal preference type of thing. But yeah, in general, I think my advice would be like, think about like what how they might respond and prepare answers in advance so you're not put on the spot. Think about why you're sharing that information with them, and also, be open to kind of whatever potential outcome. And don't base your self-worth on their outcome, because, life is too short to be worrying about the approval of people who don't really want to properly understand and accept you, right? Hope that helps. Okay. Let's see. Having a little scroll. Okay, I'm going to answer an earlier question from Michael V, which is, what are some great resources that you would recommend? My anchor partner introduced me to the Multi-Amory podcast, for example, which I find helpful. Oh, that's a different question. There's a one further up under the link with my article in it. There we go. Thank you, Steph. Resource that I would recommend. There's my page. So if you don't already, you can follow me at Polyphilia blog on, I'm mostly on Instagram, but I'm also on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. I have a Patreon as well, where I post some more bonus content and in-depth videos. Some of it about my personal life. For example, me and my girlfriend recently de-escalated our relationship, as in, we are still maintaining connection, but we're just taking some things off the table. And I talk about that on my Patreon. So if you're interested in that, patreon.com/polyphilia blog. I post content on the daily about various things related to non-monogamy. Some of it's serious, some of it's funny. I try to do a mix. But apart from myself, there are lots of other creators that I highly recommend. If you go to my Instagram and you go to my following list, I don't follow that many people. So that would probably be like a place to start. I really highly recommend diversifying the resources that you look into, because I think it's important to get a diverse range of perspectives, right? People in different relationship styles, people from different backgrounds, different races, different identities, they all have something unique to offer. And I think it's also good to absorb multiple different perspectives so that you can form your own. Apart from creators like myself, I think the Multi-Amory podcast is excellent. And I think that the non-monogamy help podcast by Lola Phoenix has also been really helpful. It's a shorter advice podcast. And Lola Phoenix is an agender autistic person who has really great insights on non-monogamy, and from a trauma-informed perspective as well. And there are lots of books out there, too many for me to list. But probably the most common one that people recommend is The Ethical Slut. Another really common one is Polysecure. I also really enjoyed A Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, and Lola Phoenix's book, The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy. So many. And so, yeah, I've enjoyed that content, and so have a look online, have a look at some articles. You can also look on my website. If you go to my website and find my media section, you'll be able to find some articles that I was interviewed for on various things related to non-monogamy. So if you don't have the time to scroll through a page, or if you don't have the time to read a whole book, articles are great for that. I've been interviewed by Cosmo, Teen Vogue, Men's Health, Women's Health, GQ, whatever, and on various things related to non-monogamy. And I've also written articles for the Field blog, for instance. I'd suggest checking those out if you have the time. And if you're looking for a more personal touch, if you're looking for more like specific advice from people, because sometimes like it's one thing to like absorb information and read books or read an article or like scroll on Instagram or something, and it's another thing to like actually kind of get a back and forth conversation and advice from someone. So I and a number of other creators offer peer support, coaching, basically. So if you want my advice on anything related to non-monogamy, you can book a session with me. So information for that is available on my Instagram and on my website. So you can find me there if you want to book some time with me to talk through your specific situation and have a back and forth conversation with me. So yeah, but different people absorb information and learn in different ways. Like some people require like a much more hands-on approach, and some people like to just go and read these resources and process and chew that information on their own. And everyone's different. So I hope that helps, Michael. Okay, I have about 5 minutes left. So I am going to answer one more question, and then I will probably have to sign off. And then you can, once again, you can join me in the group chat, which is happening on the Field app. So if someone could please put the link in again in the chat, that'd be great. So let's see what. All right. A slightly controversial question, I suppose. So a Cami girl asks, is it possible to be in a relationship with a relationship anarchist where there is a genuine connection and mutual satisfaction in the relationship? Yes. Although I suspect that you're asking this because you've probably met a relationship anarchist who wasn't really practicing relationship anarchist principles. So that's unfortunate. And a lot of people use labels and certain relationship styles to get away with doing mad shit. And that happens regardless of whatever relationship style you're in. But I'm sorry that you had this experience with someone where you did not feel a genuine connection and you did not feel mutual satisfaction. But I promise that there are relationship anarchists out there who do that. For those of you who don't know, relationship anarchy is a style of, well, it's not really a relationship style as much as it is like a life philosophy. So it's basically the idea that instead of like having kind of assumed hierarchies, you customize like what the people that you want to prioritize in your life, and that might not necessarily be a monogamous romantic partner. So you might have a best friend who you prioritize above all else, or you might have like a very unconventional queer platonic relationship. You might be in a polycule with multiple partners where you're all together raising children together, whatever. Like, so basically relationship anarchy does not mean chaos, it just means the absence of assumed hierarchies, right? So it's not like you're completely avoiding commitment. It's you're creating your own commitments. You're customizing your own commitments. That's not an excuse to be like a bad actor and to avoid emotional connection and things like that. But there are people out there who do that, and it is what it is. So I have also met my fair share of people who use certain labels that they don't mean, and try and exploit loopholes in certain ways, and that's not unique to polyamory, but yeah, I wouldn't paint all relationship anarchists with the same brush. I do think they do get a bit of a bad rap because of this behavior that you are describing. But if you actually read the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto, which is written by Andy Norgren, published in, I think, 2007, 2010. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But Google the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto. It is a page long. It is like 10 tenets. That's it. Read that, and you might be able to get more of an insight into what true relationship anarchy means, and how and what it is and what it isn't. Right. So yeah, I'm sorry you had that experience, but not all not all relationship anarchists. And hopefully you can learn a bit more about relationship anarchy yourself and be able to tell when someone is just using the label to be a bad person. All right. So okay. Right. I think that's all the time that we have today. Thank you for submitting your questions. Once again, just one last plug. that I will be continuing the conversation over on the Field app for another hour. So if you want to join me on that, you can join the group chat for this live stream, where I will be answering more questions on non-monogamy and interacting with you all. And you can also connect with other people in the chat. Isn't that lovely? You know, everyone needs community, particularly now more than ever. Yeah, thank you so much again. And as always, you can find me at Polyphilia Blog on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/polyphilia blog. I've posted some very juicy content there for Pride Month. So go check that out, please, and support my work as a creator. And I also offer private peer support if you want to speak to me for any kind of specific situation that you're going through, anything related to non-monogamy. I'm more than happy to help you. You don't have to do this alone. So I hope that this live stream has been useful in kind of, getting you thinking about non-monogamy and learning a bit more about it. You can also check out my other live streams that I've done for Field in the past. I've done several now on polyamory, and answered like a variety of questions. So if you want to learn more, you can go and do that, and also check out my articles on the Field blog. But yeah, thank you very much, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye.